One significant obstacle, if you want to take the Bible literally, is the fact that Jesus didn't spend a lot of time talking literally. A lot of his teaching is done in the form of parable. He tells a story in which the details are not important. The message is what's important. Take, for example, this one that we're going to look at today, the parable of the sower. Who does that? Who goes out and scatters seeds in all those places? No one who wants something to grow, that's for sure. So that's not the point of the parable. Or is it? Maybe what we're supposed to understand is the absurdity of that and the absurdity of God scattering seed in the places we might not look for it ourselves. Or maybe there's another lesson. But the only way we're going to find these stories is to do the thing that the sower does. Go out and plant some seeds and look for some growth. So will you come with me today on this journey to find what is growing? Let's go along on the Marginal Way.
Come in and breathe. Come in and just be. Breathe. Breathe. If you need to pray, if you need to weep, wherever you are, whatever you need, come in and just be. Come in and just breathe.
Gunjokwa, Sewara Hunzios, Gotnigari Wessa, Dano de Tino Horado, Ne Aguego Gossat Stan Sarawana Sa Oyera. Aguego Oscar, Anti the Wahwet Nuni, Ne Ungwatnigura, Dano de Tino Horado, Ne Ungwasum A, Tukadinayota, Ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar, Anti the Wahwet Nuni, Ne Ungwatnigura, Dano de Tino Horado, Ne Yetinistaha Uhunja. Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar anti de Wahwet Nuni ne Ungwatnigura dano de Tinu Horado, Tigahnigarunio, Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar anti de Wahwet Nuni ne Ungwatnigura dano de Tinu Horado, ne Gunjok Sum'a, Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar anti de Wahwet Nuni ne Ungwatnigura dano de Tinu Horado, ne Odera Sum'a, Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar anti de Wahwet Nuni ne Ungwatnigura dano de Tinu Horado, ne Ohande Sum'a, Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar anti de Wahwet Nuni ne Ungwatnigura dano de Tinu Horado, ne Odinuma Sum'a, Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Aguego Oscar anti de Wahwet Nuni ne Ungwatnigura dano de Tinu Horado, ne Gahit Sum'a, Tukadinayota ne Ungwatnigura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne ununkwa sum'a tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne jun hekwa tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne gunderio tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne garunda sum'a dano overe sum'a tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne oji da ogu'a tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne gaieri ni gawarage e tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne yeti sotogu radiweras tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date de wat nu horado ne eti de wati a joganeka garakwa tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne yeti sota a sontaneka garakwa tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date nu horado ne yoji strakorunyo tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Agwego anska anti de wahwet nuni ne ungwat ni gura dano date de wat nu horado ne sungwayat dizu tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura. Ona tofni ore, wakaderi wat kwani, doga o tana zungat ni gorha, izagit ne aiza wara sundurum, tukadi nayota ne ungwat ni gura, tok ni gawanage.
Mother Earth, Father Sun, Moon and stars, we all are one. We are all connected. We are all connected.
A sheaf of sweetgrass, bound at the end and divided into thirds, is ready to braid. In braiding sweetgrass, so that it is smooth, glossy, and worthy of the gift, a certain amount of tension is needed. Of course, you can't do it yourself by tying one end to a chair, or by holding it in your teeth and braiding backward away from yourself. But the sweetest way is to have someone else hold the end so that you can pull gently against each other, all the while leaning in, head to head, chatting and laughing, watching each other's hands, one holding steady while the other shifts the slim bundles over one another, each in its turn. Linked by sweetgrass, there is reciprocity between you. Linked by sweetgrass, the holder as vital as the braider. This will be our metaphor. Braiding sweetgrass is an intertwining of science, spirit, and story. Old stories and new ones that can be medicine for our broken relationship with Earth. A pharmacopoeia of healing stories that allow us to imagine a different relationship in which people and land are good medicine for each other. Will you hold the end of the bundle while I braid? Hands joined by grass? Can we bend our heads together and make a braid to honor the earth? And then I'll hold it for you while you braid too.
Boys and girls, old and young, all Earth's creatures live as one. We are all connected. We are all connected.
The Three Sisters. Very long ago, there were three sisters who lived in a field. The youngest was so small she could not yet walk. She crawled along the ground, dressed in green. The middle sister, who wore a bright yellow dress and darted back and forth across the field. The eldest sister stood tall and straight, and her body bent with the wind. She had long yellow hair and wore a green shawl. The three sisters loved one another very much and could not imagine living without the others. One day, a little Odawa boy came to the field. He was very handsome and knew the ways of the land. He could talk with the birds and the animals and was straight and fearless. The three sisters were very interested in this boy as they watched him use his stone knife to carve a bull or hunt with his bow and arrow. Late in the summer of the boy's first visit to the field, the youngest of the three sisters disappeared. She was the one who could only creep along the ground. She could not even stand unless there was a stick she could cling to. But she was gone, and the other two sisters mourned her until the fall. The Indian boy returned to the field to gather reeds that grew at the edge of a small stream. He used the reeds to make arrow shafts. The two remaining sisters again watched him, fascinated. That night, the second sister disappeared. The one who always wandered here and there around the field. Now, there was only one sister left, the tall and straight sister. She did not bow her head in sorrow, though she mourned deeply and thought she could not live in the field alone without her sisters. As the days grew shorter and colder, her green shawl began to lose its color, and her hair became dry and tangled. Night and day she sighed for her sisters, but her voice was low like the wind, and no one heard her. One day, in the harvest season, the little Odawa boy heard the third sister crying, and he felt sorry for her. He took her into his arms and carried her to his home. And there, a delightful surprise awaited her. Her sisters were there, in the lodge, safe and very glad to be reunited. They explained that they had been curious about the little Odawa boy and had followed him home. And they had decided to stay because winter was coming and his home was warm and comfortable. The sisters also were making themselves useful to the boy and his family. The youngest, now all grown up, kept the dinner pot full, while the second sister, still in her yellow dress, dried herself on the shelf so she could fill the dinner pot later in the winter. The eldest sister was so pleased to be with her sisters again and so impressed with the help they gave the boy that she too began drying herself so the family would have a meal to use as the winter went on. And from that day to this, the three sisters were never separated again.
Later the same day, Creator sets free, left that place and found a quiet spot to sit by the lake of Chief Garden. Once again, people began to gather around him. The number of people was so great that he sat down in a canoe and pushed out a little ways from the shore. The people gathered at the shoreline on the water's edge and sat down to listen to him. The great storyteller began to tell his stories, teaching people about Creator's good road. Here is one of the many stories he told them. Listen, he said. A seed planter went to plant some seeds and began to scatter them about on the ground. Some seeds fell on the village pathway, and the winged ones pecked at the seeds and ate them all. Some of the seeds fell on the rocks where there was only a little dirt. The plants sprouted up quickly, but when the sun came out, they dried up because they had no roots. Other seeds fell into the weeds, and thistles sprouted around the seeds and choked the life out of them. But some seeds fell on good ground, grew strong, and gave a harvest. Some gave 100 times what was planted, some 60, and others 30. The ones who have ears, let them hear and understand.
In her book, Braiding Sweet Grass, Robin Wall Kimmerer has a chapter where she speaks about the census in her small town. And she realizes that if, as the native people would encourage, that more than humans were counted as persons, that personhood should not be limited to humanity. If that were the case, then, well, the leaders might be the trees. And the leader of the trees is the maple. And so, therefore, she lives in Maple Nation. Even though we are in the pine tree state, I get that. It's a big state. You got to go a little farther north to get those boreal woods, right? We're not quite there. We're still in Maple Nation here. So we share something in common with the author of the book and the humans who have spent time living with these more than humans much longer than any of us and shared their wisdom over time through generations. And they would tell us, as we have heard in previous stories, that the maples once flowed with syrup. Oh, if only, right? Now it takes some work. We must take 40 gallons of sap just to get 1 gallon of syrup. We must contribute our gifts to their gifts. But these maples have been teaching us, have been speaking to those, as Jesus would say, who have ears to hear, the lesson of offering yourself as a gift. And 24/7, they are who they are. And in the course of a year, the rising of the sap and the returning of the sap is done effortlessly. It is their work. It is their labor. It defines who they are. And they never stop. Do you ever stop in your work? What is it about us that is different? What is it that makes it so hard for us to offer our gifts? That's what we need to look at. Who are we? And are we listening to our neighbors, to our siblings, the trees? Or as the story today tells us, are we listening to the 3 sisters? And we know from agricultural practice that there's wisdom in that practice, that these peoples who lived close to the land, who understood how things grow, understood scientific truth before we had scientific truth to prove it, right? There's, yes, a practicality to growing your beans, growing up on the stalk of the corn stalk, and there's a wisdom to planting your squash so that those leaves retain the water. And that came through trial and error, no doubt, over generation and generation. But science confirms that these 3 plants all are aggressively seeking what they need at the expense of other things that then can be offered. See, our scientific mind sees it as competition, right? They're all competing for the light. And so the corn grows up quickly, but then it needs the nitrogen in the soil, and it needs the water. And the beans are literally providing a way for all this nitrogen in the air to get into the soil. Science has figured that out. Well, people who lived farming the land for for generation after generation already knew that, even if they couldn't explain it in that way, because they were listening to the three sisters. Now, you and I might think it's odd to listen to an inanimate object, to a plant, to a tree. But maybe we should accept this wisdom. Maybe we should start to listen. You know, we've got this wonderful, beautiful art museum up the hill. And I'm sure if you visited it, you've talked about the art speaking to you. I mean, really, what more is a statue, a sculpture, than stone speaking, telling a story? There's different ways of listening, different ways of understanding, different ways of perceiving. And we ought to be more open to those stories, those messages, to listening, so that we might grow. And maybe we should consider what it means in our lives. When people look at you, what story do they see? What story does your existence tell? What are your gifts that you are giving 24/7, constantly? What is it that names who you are? What is your story without words? Jesus listened to creation. Jesus heard the creation speak, the Creator speaking through the creation. And you'll notice most of his parables involve exactly that. The one we heard today about the seed and the sower tells us all kinds of things. In fact, he had to unpack it for his followers. And we can unpack it if we want. That's not where we're going to go today. We're going to look at the fact that in that story, one important takeaway is that the seed falls on different soils, right? There are different soils. We're not all the same. And we all have to cope with different things. And maybe in our spiritual lives, we have a bit of a choice what soil we're going to plant the seeds in. Certainly in our gardens we do. And we know that, right? I mean, it is New England, so I know that we're growing rocks because that's what grows here. Where do they come from? You know, you go out and till the new rocks, they grew from last season. They're just always here. But you know that you have to cope with that. And so you plant accordingly, right? And maybe you bring in topsoil. Maybe you bring in fertilizer because you have to do that. And you know whether you're planting in the sun or the shade and what will grow there. All of those bits of knowledge are critical, and you make choices. And in our spiritual life, we need to do the same. What kind of environment are we choosing for ourselves so that we might grow and thrive? That's what Jesus is getting at in this parable, that we need to be the kind of people who choose the best for our spiritual growth. Now, I will grant you that there's also a side of the story that talks about the randomness of it. We don't control sometimes if we're the seed being tossed in among the thistles and getting choked out, or if we're the ones falling among the rocks and maybe the birds are coming and eating the seeds. Sometimes that's beyond our control. That's why part of the important lesson of this parable is that we need others. You know, like the three sisters. It's about complementing one another, not competing with one another. It's important to be there for one another. And so sometimes the gift that we need are fellow believers who come along and help us out. It's as simple as that. And sometimes there aren't others to help us. Sometimes we're totally alone. And the sun is scorching, or the thistles are choking, or the birds are eating, and we just need the gardener, the holy heavenly gardener, to come and water and to weed and to care for us. So we should be slow to judge. We should be patient, because you can't garden, you can't grow anything without patience. And you can't judge something that won't grow. And so whether it's our own spiritual life, where we need to be gentle with ourselves, not judging, being patient, waiting for what comes next, or whether it's other people who aren't quite growing the way we think they ought to, right? Whether, maybe we're the corn and we're saying, where are those beans to give me some nitrogen? Or we're the beans saying, where's that corn for us to grow on? Or we're saying, that squash better come along because we need one another. Maybe judgment isn't the case. Maybe it's about understanding our need for one another and caring. And maybe it's about understanding our gifts. What is the thing that you bring to the dinner party? What is it that God has blessed you with and God is nurturing you? God, the gardener, working in you to bring that forth. What is it? Or what are the gifts? Because it doesn't have to be just one thing. Don't get yourself into the corner of, I couldn't figure out what my gift was, so I did nothing. Understand that God has a purpose for you here and now. You see, God is doing good in our lives. God is gifting each and every one of us, and we are more than the three sisters. We're the many, many sisters. We need one another. That's part of the message. And that's wisdom that indigenous folks have known for a long time. It's wisdom that Jesus taught us in the parables, and it's something that we too quickly and too easily forget. And if we concern ourselves only with our own spiritual growth, well, then we're forgetting that our gifts are not ours to keep. Our gifts are to give away. That's the point. We need to be serving the common good. That's what God is doing in us, is giving us gifts so that we can give them away so that good will happen in the world. That's God's way. Now, we have not been good citizens of Maple Nation. That almost goes without saying, doesn't it? We maybe don't need to beat ourselves up much more about it, but the truth of the matter is that in a generation, within 50 years, the environment we are in now will be hostile to maple trees. Hostile to them. The leader of the trees in our area will have a hard time surviving. We will change from Maple Nation to Oak Nation. And maybe that's the way of the world and that's what's to come, but we know we have a hand in that, and maybe we should do something about slowing that. If you've been observant over time living in this area and you are aware and listen to the world around you, you will have seen that the boreal forest, the pine tree nation, which is just to our north, is also to our height, its elevation. You go to the mountains. When you hike a mountain, you notice that the habitat changes. You get into subalpine habitat. The conifers take over. The deciduous trees disappear. And it's a different habitat there. And I know, because I've seen it, that line keeps going farther up the mountain. It's like water's rising and the island losing space. I know that because I've been part of a long-term study to look for Bicknell's thrushes, which nest only in the boreal woods, but also then at the high peaks. They have not nested on the peak of Mount Greylock in Massachusetts for 50, 60 years now. They once did. The habitat's no longer suitable for them, so they can migrate north and find new homes. But I was there one time and saw a snowshoe hare. How's it going to get north? It's not. And how are the pines that live there when they get supplanted by the maples that come next, and maybe, sadly, ultimately by the oaks that show up? What will they do other than give their lives, lay down, and give their nutrients back to the soil? Yes, that's the way of living. We die and we give back. But we have a choice, my friends, in our living to choose what we do with our gifts. We can hold on to them and nurture them and just be for ourselves and only pass them on in whatever ways our children and our children's children learn them from us. Whatever little ways we share our knowledge. Or we can choose, because we have the moral agency. In fact, we have the spiritual responsibility to give those gifts, to give them for the common good, to create changes that guide the future. We have that power. We have that obligation. We can do it through the giving of our gifts, not something that we don't know how to do, but doing the thing we do know how to do. And this is our responsibility, to love our neighbor. Whether our neighbor is our tree neighbor or our river neighbor, or even our neighbor who is not yet born, not yet hatched, not yet sprouted. Amen.
Thank you for the gift of your time. Thank you for sticking with us to this point. I hope that there's some important takeaway for you today. Maybe some seed that will grow as it finds root in your soul. And I hope that you will be grateful for it and show that gratitude by being a gift to others, being exactly who you are and giving of your gifts. And if you can give a little time for us to like this video, to share this video, to subscribe to our channel, we would be very grateful. And if you have some financial gift that you might be able to give, please do visit our website, and there you'll find the details of how you can help us serve those on the margins of our community. And so, friends, until we return again, may you grow in the love of God. May you find the shining light of God's Spirit all around you, sustaining you, that you might find blessings and peace.
So this is the end of the story. Everything we had, everything we did is buried in dust, and this dust is all that's left of us. And only a few ever worried. While the signs will clear, they have no idea. You just get used to living in fear or give up when you can't even see the future. We walk the plank with eyes wide open. We walk the plank with our eyes wide open. We walk the plank with our eyes wide open. Some people laugh at our bed sores. We made it out like we heard, and they were only words. They didn't add up to the change in the way we were living. And the saddest thing is all of it could have been avoided. But it was like to stop consuming is to stop being human. Why'd I make a change if you won't? We're all in the same boat, staying afloat for the moment. We walk the plank with eyes wide open. We walk the plank with our eyes wide open. We walk the plank with our eyes wide open. With eyes wide open, we walk the plank, we walk the plank. With eyes wide open, we walk the plank, walk the plank. With eyes wide open, we walk the plank. So, is that the end of the story?